For the lecture series, in which we are starting its fifth lecture today, our aim is to discuss on the idea of time, or philosophy of time. So various streams of philosophy, whether it's Sanskrit Shastras or what is called classical Indian philosophy, or studies in modern Indian culture or history. We believe attending our ears towards those who have something to say, and this time Professor Velassery on the idea of time can help us think more profoundly about time, past, history, future, and the way they shape our surroundings or vice versa. Today's topic is time in philosophy and cosmotheandrism, a phenomenological critique. About the speaker, Dr. Velassery is now a retired professor at Department of Philosophy at Panjab University, Chandigarh, India, is a senior fellow of the Indian Council of Philosophical Research. In addition, he is awarded UGC National Emeritus in the year 2017-19. His areas of interest are value theory, Indian philosophy, phenomenology, and social philosophy. He was a visiting professor at the Catholic University of America, Washington, D.C. in 1996-1997. 2001 and 2005. Besides 87 research papers published in various national and international journals and edited volumes, Velassery has published 14 books. His publishers are Council for Research in Value and Philosophy, USA, Universal Publishers, Brown Walker Press, USA Marshall Cavendish International, Singapore and Indian Overseas Press, New Delhi. He was a visiting professor at JNU, New Delhi in the year 2017-19 and was a nominated member of MHRD of ICPR from 2012 to 2015. His latest book, Social Philosophy of Vivekananda and Indian Nationalism, is published by Overseas Press, India, and republished by Universal Publishers, Brown Walker Press, Boca Raton, Florida, USA. Some of his some of his other books include Casteism and Human Rights toward an Ontology of Social Order, published by Marshall Cavendish International, Singapore, Reasoning and Faith, Cultural Foundation for Civil Society and Globalization, Death and Transcendence, A Cross-Cultural Journey, Phenomenology, Issues and Perspectives, Justice and Responsibility, Relearning to be Human, Caste, Identities and Ideology of Exclusion, Wisdom, Tradition, Cultural Creativity, and Social Change, Identity, Creativity and Modernization, Perspectives on Indian Cultural Tradition, Globalization and Cultural Identities, Philosophical Challenges and Opportunities. Finally, Foundations of Indian Social Life, Cultural, Religious and Aesthetic. Welcome Dr. Sebastian Velassery for offering us this honor to listen to him on this lecture.
When we think about time, I think there are two opposing points of view with regard to time, which pertains to Parmenides and Heraclitus, respectively. Parmenides maintained that ultimate physical reality is timeless, whereas in the case of Heraclitus, according to him, or his central doctrine was that the world is the totality of events and not of things. The Stoics, who regarded the universe as a dynamic continuum, understand by the cosmic cycle that the cosmos, although subject to continuous metabolism, never dies, and that its immortality is only another expression of the infinite extension of time. That is to say, the never ceasing succession of events. Similarly, the ancient atomists, notably the Epicureans, believed that world is composed of the same indestructible elementary particles which are continually being destroyed and recreated. Therefore, throughout the Greek thought and likewise in other ancient cosmologies, for example, Hindu cosmology, time was regarded as essentially periodic because the universe was thought to be cyclic. The idea of a cyclic universe did not imply a truly cyclic view of time, but only the periodic repetition of the various states of the universe. Then the question is, how do we consider time as linear rather than cyclic? The historians would say that it is because of the rise of Christianity with its central doctrine of crucifixion as a unique event in time, was this cardinal factor causing men to think of time as linear progression rather than cyclic repetition. The first philosophical theory of time, inspired by Christian revelation, was that of St. Augustine, who rejected the traditional concept of cyclic universe and maintained that time is the measure of human consciousness of the irreversible and unrepeatable rectilinear movement of history. As St. Augustine says, what then is time? If no one asks me, I know it. But if I want to explain it to a questioner, then I do not know about it. Yet, I would say with all confidence that I know that if nothing passed away, there would be no past time. If nothing were coming, then there would be no future time. And if nothing were existing, there would be no present time. As St. Augustine confesses, what is now plain and clear is that neither future nor past things are in existence, and that it is not correct to say that there are three periods of time. I mean, the past, the present, and the future. Perhaps I think it would be proper for us to put it in another way. The present of things past, the present of things present, the present of things future. Because these three are in the soul according to him, and he does not think that it can be somehow situated somewhere place. The present of things past is memory for him. The present of things present is immediate vision. The present of future is expectation. Immanuel Kant was essentially concerned with the question of the finitude of the universe of time and not of time itself. He assumed that different times as parts or delimitation of a single underlying time, and that this single underlying time is unlimited. On the other hand, Henry Bergson, with the exception of Heraclitus, is perhaps the most outstanding philosopher defending the reality of time. According to him, time is the fundamental principle and essence of the process. For him, reality is a continuous flow like a stream. It is a process through which runs a vital impulse, that is to say, ilan vital. What Bergson means by durée may be summed up as an indivisible, irreversible continuity, heterogeneous qualitative multiplicity, and the product of mental synthesis. The successive parts of time interpenetrate and permeate one another. In this sense, it is true that everything requires time. Nothing can be without a temporal reference, and it is more especially so when we are talking of the evolutionary processes. According to him, if reality is non-temporal, it does not reveal its nature of time, because time ceases to be in the absolute. Time is unreal according to MacTaggart. To him, past, present, and future are the properties of events and movements, but these are characteristic features that we ascribe to events. These considerations on time in the Western philosophy imply that there have been predominantly three views with regard to the conception of time. According to the idealist, number one, time is wholly a figment of imagination. Pythagorean school and members of Eleatic school expounded the idealist view of time. The idealistic conception of time was rejected primarily because of the reason that if all change and becoming is only apparent, then the whole world around us must be only apparent as well. It was Plato who brought out a compromise on the idealist view by positing a true reality behind ordinary apparent reality. It is mainly in this moderate form that the idealist view on time existed. Spinoza and Immanuel Kant upheld a view of this kind, and in our present time, such a view is held by phenomenology, analytical philosophy, and philosophy of science. While the temporal idealist is generally mathematically inclined, the temporal realist has more often shown a leaning towards physics and other natural sciences. Without change and movement, there would be nothing for the scientists to study. Therefore, it is a wonder that he considers time as one of the prime, one of the prime realities. In this way, we arrive at a third view of time, that is the rational view. Leibniz was the first to formulate explicitly such a view. He defines time as an order of successions. According to him, time is nothing but the order of succession. Succession implies that one thing occurs after the other, which again implies that there is a relationship between phenomena from which the concept of time is developed and the relation of before and after, or earlier and later. I can summarize the uh, you know the essential differences among these conceptions of time maybe in this way. Number one, according to the idealist view, time is nothing but a concept and therefore dependent on human consciousness. Number two, according to the realist view, time is a self-sufficing entity which is not dependent on anything else. And number three, with regard to the relational view, time is a concept and is therefore dependent on consciousness, but at the same time, it is a function of the events happening in nature. And four, the realists emphasize the idea that there is no time without consciousness, but neither would there be time without events. If Greece conceived of time as the life of being, the classical India perceived time as the life breath of reality. Hence, the classical Indian philosophers contended that it is time that matures beings and encompasses things. According to them, time is the Lord who works change in beings. Time created earth. In time is consciousness. And therefore, in a more explicit way, according to them, time is life, that is to say, prana. In the earliest experience of the Vedic Indians, time was described as the actual existence of beings. Therefore, the word kala, which designates time, appears in the Rig Veda that speaks of ayu or ayus, which means the vital force, the time of life, the long life, the existential span or duration of every being. Moreover, according to the Vedic seers, time is born with a sacrifice, and it is by sacrifice that it is once again destroyed. This concept is rooted but on the intimate relation between worship and time, and provide us with a key to the understanding of the central place of sacrifice and man's participation in the unfolding of time. It again means that the time and reality belong together, and the experience of time, it amounts to the experience of reality. The Indian world has had its own diverse approaches to time. The most important two works on time, which is known to me, that emerged from the religio-philosophical matrices of Indian tradition, is one version of Vedanta known as the grammar philosophy, stemming from Bhartrihari's Vakyapadiya, and the other Madhyamaka branch of Buddhist philosophy in Nagarjuna's Madhyamaka. Bhartrihari's treatment of time is rather elaborate compared to Nagarjuna's. His treatment of time is found mostly in the first kanda and in the topical section. He lists a number of views which he rejects. Most important of all is the Vaisheshika view of time, according to which time is a substance, Dravya. The Vijnanapada understanding of time as a construct of the mind and the Sankhyan understanding of time as potentiality of gunas are also described and rejected. According to Bhartrihari, time is the most important powers of Brahman, Kala Shakti, or power of time is a creative power of Kartra Shakti. Accordingly, Bhartrihari argues that there is a cooperative cause, or we can say Sakakari Karanam of everything. It is further again stated that it is the operation of the machine called cosmos. Time implies a certain persistence of the past and duration of the subject. We may call it memory or the mere awareness that the human subject is temporal in character in order to have the awareness of time. Time is neither merely objective because time does not belong to the objects only, nor purely subjective because time does not belong to subjects exclusively. Time in itself is meaningless. In other words, man lives time as time is all pervading. There is no human subject without time consciousness. Everything is in its grips, not only humans, but also matter, sentient and non-sentient alike. Thus, Bhartagiri says, time is the matrix of all differentiation, and everything suffers the bite of time. On the other hand, salvation, liberation, enlightenment, divinization, glorification, nirvana, mukti, all this, they all consist in escaping and passing beyond time, realizing that it brings to its fullness, so to say, transcending or annihilating time. Let me sum up in the following way. I can say that time cannot be abstracted from anything because everything, including consciousness, is temporal. Time is an aspect of the real rather than an abstraction. It is a perspective under which we envision all things and all beings. Now the question is, under which aspect do we envisage things when we speak their temporal dimensions? This is the startling issue which needs a thorough exploration. In order to detect the temporality of the objects, we have to detect as well the temporality of the human subject, for we do not know anything non-temporal. Time seems to stick to everything. Time and being, philosophers would say, belong together. That is to say that every being is temporal. If time is abstracted from being, then can we say that we would abstract the being from the whole of being? Many traditions argue that the sublation of time is a passage to reach the divine. It makes me to say that, to consider that the path to realization, and the way to reality consists in overcoming time. And this is called Eternity by Raymond Panikar. Against temporality on the one hand and timelessness or eternity on the other hand. According to Panikar, our thinking about time necessarily presupposes a present, as we are incapable of perceiving the now without the point of reference to the present. We may remember the past and even foresee the future only from the platform of a present. According to Panikar, this now seems to reveal something more than what we anticipate. There is a novelty in all that we say as the present. That does not come from the past and which does not determine the future. Yes, this is an aspect of freedom that we experience in the now, which may be called eternity or divinity by Panikar. We may even say that this eternity reveals itself temporarily in the now. In other words, every temporal movement is sweating out eternity. Panikar introduces a different term here as a sacred secularity. Sacred secularity, according to him, is an expression used by Panikar, meaning that reality is temporal, yet more than temporality. Now, this more than is not a mere juxtaposition, as if eternity, for instance, would arrive after time, or as if a supra-temporal being were temporal, plus something else. But eternity is built into the core of temporality. In this sense, every temporal moment is a sacred moment. Every secular reality is a sacred reality. Therefore, we can maintain that every divinity has to be measured within materiality. In other words, divinity is to be measured and discovered in the midst of matter. In a word, eternity and temporality, sacrality and secularity belong together. One is not without the other. In order to prove the togetherness of eternity and temporality, or sacrality and secularity, Panikkar takes a course to the Advaitic intuition. When Panikkar says Advaita, he means that the subject and the object are not two. Without being one, that the divine and the cosmos and all the human are not two, without being the same. It is not falling into a contradiction because the nature of reality is polar, each being constitutive of the whole. Tempeternity for Panikkar then is the non-dualistic intuition of non-dual character of reality, which is temporal yet more than temporal. It is eternal. Temporality and eternity are two sides of the same coin. Panikkar has created the word tempeternity to express that which overcomes the scheme of time here and eternity later. According to him, the entire reality is tempeternal. That is to say, temporal and eternal in one and the same time, in a non-dualistic relation. If fragmented experiences of the human subject leads to the externalization of time, where acceleration, repetition, and thrust towards the future are predominant categories, then a holistic experience of time would imply that, imply the exteriorization of time, which would make us cherish our temporality and live, and what to say, and live the present moment in all its intensity. As I have mentioned earlier, temporality is an essential dimension of man and reality. Therefore, man and reality is not fully exhausted by temporality. It is in this sense that interiorization of time is not just a mere acceptance of our temporality. It consists in transcending time. Transcending time does not amount to its negation. Rather, it points to the discovery of the other dimension of the temporal aspect of reality. It is through this discovery that we enter into interconnection and interrelation with the divine or eternal experience. That's why yajna or sacrifice and similar things are performed in order to reach the fullness of ourselves, which consists in being temporal but not exclusively temporal. Panikkar therefore has termed it as tempeternity to express the same holistic intuition, which basically attempts to overcome the dualistic scheme of time now and eternity later. Tempeternity then is the non-dualistic intuition of the non-dual character of reality, which is temporal and at the same time more than temporal, so to say eternal. Temporality and eternity are therefore two sides of the same coin. Panikkar's submission is that we can combine temporality and eternity in a non-dualistic experience, that in every temporal kernel there is at the same time an eternal kernel, not as something that lies beyond, but as something which is constitutive of the very human experience. Of course, it comes to our next point, that is to say, the paradox of time and eternity. The concept of eternity makes a significant difference, I should say, in the consideration of a variety of issues in the philosophical literature and especially in philosophy of religion. Boethius, it coherently defines this concept, and his definition runs as follows. Eternity, let me define as Boethius done it. Eternity, according to Boethius, it is the complete possession all at once of illimitable life. It is the complete possession all at once of illimitable life. I think there are 4 ingredients in this definition, I think, really, which calls for our attention. Number 1, that anything that is eternal has life. Number 2, the life of an eternal being cannot be limited. And 3, the concept of duration that emerges in the interpretation of illimitable life is the 3rd ingredient. And lastly, the 4th one, he conceives of an eternal entity as atemporal. With the possible exception of Parmenides, None of the ancients or medieval philosophers who accepted, eternity as a real, temporal mode of existence denied the reality of time or suggested that all temporal experiences are illusory. In proposing the concept of eternity, such philosophers and Boethius in particular had introduced the two separate modes of real existence. Eternity is a mode of existence which, on Boethius' view, is neither reducible to time nor incompatible with the reality of time. Boethius introduced and developed the concept of eternity primarily to argue that divine omniscience is compatible with human freedom, and he did so, by demonstrating that omniscience on the part of an eternal entity need not involve knowledge. The paradox of time and eternity, therefore, exists for the destiny both of the world and of the individual. Man is said to enter into the eternal life after death, but eternal and immortal life regarded from within and not objectified is essentially, different in quality from the natural and even the supernatural existence. It is a spiritual life in which eternity is attained while still in time. If man's existence were wholly taken up into the spirit and transformed into the spiritual life, so that the spiritual principle gained final possession of the natural elements of the body and the soul, then death is as a natural fact would not take place. The transition to eternity would be accomplished without the event, which externally appears as death. Eternal life is revealed in time. It may unfold itself in every instant as an eternal present. I think eternal life is not a future life. It is a life in the present. Therefore, it's a mistake to expect eternity as a happening place in the future. In my understanding, eternity and eternal life are said to be a deliverance from time. In Heidegger's terminology, it means the cessation of anxiety, which gives temporal form of existence. For Heidegger, time and temporality are qualified and not conceived mechanically. They are the ground of being, so that transcendence is rooted in the essence of time. Therefore, as Heidegger says in his preface to Zayn and Zayd, time is to be defined as the possible horizon of the very understanding of being. That's why Heidegger says being finds its sense in temporality. Time and decay govern all things. Through temporality, what he means is that we are not concerned with something that is simply there, but which cannot be eliminated. The most important point, however, is Heidegger's view that Dasein can be accomplished only in temporality, insofar as existence is always fulfilled in it. According to him, the present moment is capable of acquiring a timeless temporality and thus transcending itself in all its presence. Just as Jasper says, eternity and transitoriness meet in such a moment of time. In view of the fact of transitoriness that conditions human life, our most intimate concern should be to show forth the individual that his most precious moment, man is supposed to be completely finite, and yet in this finiteness there is something transcending him as superfinite, yet remaining finite. Therefore, an attempt is made to introduce a temporal eternity into what is not eternal. The term eternity is obviously ambiguous and vague. Originally, it was used to express the idea of eternal continuance as superiority to time. As for example, with a spiritual person who, being a real person of intrinsic value, does not perish. In this case, I think it outlasts time and remains superior to time in its living consistency. Even Heidegger expresses a similar conception of infinity when he poses the question whether finiteness is all at all possible without the notion of infinity. If, as he says, we are prepared philosophically to construe God's eternity and Heidegger is not prepared to do so, it would be suitable to use the term infinite temporality. Thus, Kierkegaard's religious metaphysical attitude, encountering the eternal in the moment of time, may mean the condensation of time in eternity, whereas Heidegger and Sartre admit that inner human existence can be freed from time only in the sense of oblivion of time. If human existence, or if I put it in this way, if human experience cannot transcend the framework of relative finiteness in present situation and temporal dimension, then, then freedom from time remains subjective in character. Jaspers therefore ascribes that the temporal is seized as the appearance of eternal being. Thus, eternity is felt in the sense of existential subjectivity and does not carry us into a sphere possessing a content, which would truly free us from the transitoriness of finite existence. On a closer examination, I would say we can understand that there is more than mere oblivion of time in the above sense of eternity. Contemporary philosophers prefer to understand eternity in the sense of oblivion of time, a freedom from time, and as the expression of timelessness. Time is set aside wherein we may fully realize a profound moment without being able to affirm a supratemporal content. In such an experience, man remains in temporality but is bound to go beyond his temporal dimension. As distinct from such an understanding, eternity may also be described as never-ending duration of an ever-finite world. Time goes on and on. Against this notion is the independence from time in the eternal validity of suprasensual contents, which determines man's existence and action, which are which are valued by the human subject. This includes the idea of the achievement of the timeless values which we talk about. Temporality, as such, annihilates the promise of eternity which time carries. Therefore, the eternity that we conceive is an eternity of constant passage, the stream of moments. The real eternity of which time is the promise. In the language of Sankhya and Vedanta, it is the Kudastha Nityada, is undelivered, while what is delivered is the mere eternity of passage. The failure of time to be what it promises to be is what makes Nagarjuna, it was said, therefore time does not exist. Now, let me conclude. I will take maybe some 3 more minutes, I believe. I think, is it okay, Himanshu? Yeah. Um,
Yes, sir, yes.
yeah. Now, if we pursue the idea of the complete finiteness, you know, temporality and historicity of human existence to its limits, then the result is that we no longer have access to the absolute. If that's the case, how do we understand time and eternity or the so-called absolute? That's what and here I stop. I think thank you so much for your patient hearing. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Himanshu, I stop
everyone.
here. Yes, thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Maybe if any one of you would uh, can have questions. Thank you for the lecture, sir. It was really intriguing, and I have a few questions will ask in last. We will start with Amarjit. Amarjit, please go on.
Thank you for the lecture, sir. It was really, I was reminiscing about our times at JNU. I mean, it was the way that you teach, the way that you bring the
Yeah.
audience along with you. Um, my question then is regarding this fascinating aspect of how, so in these religious ways of thinking, I'm not familiar with the work of Raman Panikkar, but generally in the religious way of thinking, there is this triangle that is drawn between theos, anthropos, and cosmos, right? Between
Yes,
God, man, and uh, the world,
world.
cosmos, right? Now, if uh, the finitude of anthropos in that triangle is
Uh,
inextricably dependent upon the timelessness of God, then is secularism a break not just with God in that triangle, but a break with the finitude of ourself? Like if we remove God from the triangle, we will no longer have a connection to our own finitude, to our own mortality. Am I understanding
Mhm.
that right? What would you say to that?
Yeah, let me come back to maybe let me start with the concept of so-called Cosmotheandrism. Eternity, reveals, according to, Raymond Panikkar, uh, temporarily in the now, and every temporal moment is actually sweating out eternity. According to him, every temporal moment is sweating out eternity. This is an aspect of freedom that we experience in the now, which according to him may be called eternity or divinity by Panikkar. Now the question is that the cosmotheandric, if I use the term cosmotheandric, the cosmotheandric concept, of Panikkar is the irreducible dimensions of reality into three: cosmos, theos, and anthropos. It is a blend of the earthly, divine, and human. Therefore, Panikkar would say that these three dimensions are not only interrelated, but they are interdependent, and they constitute the real. And the thing is that although humans are subject to the paradox of time and eternity, they are understood to be a product of time and history. Therefore, human beings remain in temporality, but are bound to go beyond this temporality. Now, coming back to your second part of the question, of course, not religious in a way. I think Panikkar, although he was a Roman Catholic priest earlier, but at the same time, of course, he released that in a way. But Panikkar somehow would say that you cannot talk about what is an eternity without temporality. Therefore, we can talk about the eternity, okay, whatever it may be. Eternity, there is nothing about what is so-called divinity here. Okay, the eternity is what to say based on the so-called temporality. A temporal dimension of eternity has to be postulated in order to appropriate the meaningfulness of the human reality. That's the point I'm talking about. I don't know how far I could, because Amarjit has been a questioner in JNU also, So therefore, I don't know whether I have satisfied your, interest. But anyway, I think we can argue anyway. I think that's.
Yeah. Thank you, Majid. Any other questions or comments? Do we have other questions?
Have I made you confused, or did you did you understand at least some terms like eternity, temporality,
We did,
eternity,
sir.
cosmotheandrism?
Actually, yeah, basically the parts where you're talking about, like how although apparently paradoxical ideas, temporality, which is basically I can say successiveness or succession and eternity as being talked about. This is really, and when Bhartrihari talks about, so after Bhartrihari in Kashmiri Shaivism or Pratyabhidya, their whole system is actually based upon that idea. There is one side trans-successiveness of the absolute and one side the successiveness of the world,
Uh,
and what you call divinity. So maybe they make it usable or they make it plausible by this idea of delimiter. So there is a uh, gradual reduction in the freedom of the absolute, and then we come to
mhm.
successiveness from the trans. Maybe you can.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
sir. Yes, sir.
mean, Himanshu, let me somehow come back to what to say. Let me, what to say, not summarize, rather, let me have a different glance of the lecture which I have given. Okay, now. In fact, my
Yes, sir.
presentation was consisting of three parts. Okay. Firstly, I was somehow trying to understand the historical trajectory of the concept of time. Okay, right from the Western philosophy, then coming back to our Indian philosophers. Okay, talking about. Then, of course, the question about the holistic experience of time. Then I was talking about maybe the paradox of time and eternity. Okay, these are the four parts. Okay, so what I wanted to say, firstly, that the human beings, of course, you see, naturally speaking, we seem to have been gripped and strangled between the inalienable realities of here and now in one way and eternity on the other side. Okay? I mean, here and now
Yeah.
and eternity other side. So I'm saying that the temporal and the the temporal and the timeless, the transient and the permanent, the ephemeral and the eternal, they are the, conscious dual entities that humans experience in their mundane life. Okay, which for philosophical genius is a philosophical problem, a serious philosophical problem to be reflected and what to say resolved. So I am
Yeah.
saying that, I mean, therefore, time is a highly complex phenomenon without which no measurement of life events could be possible. Therefore, it is it's a matrix of life in the sense that without even appropriating time as a reality, okay, we cannot somehow appropriate the meaningfulness of human subject. Therefore, the reality,
Yes.
time, reality, eternity, time, eternity. These are the things I'm talking about. So therefore, no, perhaps I must have been able to confuse you rather than to convince you. I think well. Another thing was that of course it's in a webinar type, of course, if it's a lecture type, something different. Webinar, of course, he was actually looking at the
True,
machine.
sir.
My 32 years
Yeah.
of my teaching philosophy, I had never started taught. Of course, Amarjit knows about it. I can stand and teach,
Yes.
and that only what to say, the philosophical idea will come out at least within me, well from me, But whatever it may be, but anyway, I have
Yeah.
been trying to explicate, I mean, some 4 or 5 concepts, something about the historical trajectory of time, especially then the Boethius concept of time, and also from the Indian philosophy concept of time, especially Nagarjuna and Bhartrhari. Then I was talking about the main problem about the holistic experience of time, which makes me to somewhat talk about Heidegger. And therefore, I talk about the paradox of time and eternity, because the time and eternity rather it is very paradoxical, because you talk about time, then about eternity, timelessness. It is a paradox. Therefore,
Yes.
I talk about what to
Yeah.
say. Father Raymond Paniker's eternity, temporality with eternity. That's it.
Yeah. So it was not confusing, but yeah, very crisp. And I might left something, but I got the sense. That's a real physical problem. Like because we think in the binary terms of explaining these terms, but the experiential human condition is something different. That
I,
you said, like the present moment can also be the moment of
and, a,
eternity.
and a poor philosophy teacher like me, I am not that
No,
expert,
no,
especially I would say with this machine,
no, no.
because you are. Although I am from IIT Kanpur,
Now
but I am not a techno-savvy person. Let me very frankly tell you, I'm not a techno-savvy. Of course, I can somehow manipulate at least,
that's never an issue, sir.
that's
Uh,
all.
Hearing your voice and conveying these ideas were enough for us, so that's never a problem. Yeah. So
So,
we have questions. Pooja Tripathi. Yeah, shall we take sir two more questions?
yeah, please, you take your own time, no problem.
Okay. Pooja, please go ahead.
Good afternoon to everyone. So, sir, my question is regarding that Heideggerian sense that Heidegger has always tiptoed around the very concept of eternity, and using that only, I think he has differentiated his understanding of concept of time. But, sir, how is it viable to not conceive eternity as a valid vantage point for deriving the meaning? I mean, he has taken temporal experiences as our finitude only, that decides our lived experience in time only, that decides the meaning of life. But why cannot we take two facts both as coterminous or existing together, that eternity also gives meaning? And
So, I
that's
mean,
why,
excuse me, your second part of the question, I mean, you are talking something about Bible?
no, sir, I'm talking about Heidegger, that
She
Uh-huh.
said viable, I guess,
Oh,
right?
Bible, okay.
Viable.
Yeah, yeah.
okay. So he has not taken eternity into its own in its his philosophy. That why eternity cannot also give that kind of meaning to to human life.
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe I can give only one simple answer for that. I mean, I don't know how far it will suit you. I mean, in line with Heidegger's perception, I would say, suppose if I quote Heidegger, transcendence is rooted in the essence of time. Let me put it this way. As you see, transcendence is rooted in the essence of time. Therefore, once we get not only the essence, even the sense of time, then only one can talk about transcendence. I mean, transcendence means what? Actually, of course, not in terms of oblivion of time, okay, but not escape from time, but of course, we can transcend. To transcend means, of course, see, maybe I mean, a philosopher like even, but to say, Shankara, he talks about two ways. One is, of course, to see, you know, you know, approaching towards something, but waiting for something. We transcend means what is go beyond. Okay. So the question is that if transcendence is actually rooted in the essence of time, it means that one can talk about eternity only while talking, only what to say by escaping or transcending the so-called temporality. I mean to say,
Momentary
if you are able
experience.
to, if you are able to go beyond your temporality, the temporal dimension of life. Okay, but what is actually temporality? Temporality is actually what? Man's living in time is temporality, isn't it? Man's or my living in in time, that is temporality. Therefore, no, I cannot talk about temporality. I mean, divorcing my life or my existence. Therefore, my being in time and my living a life, that is the temporality I'm talking about. Therefore, no, transcending time. Okay, I mean, what to say? That should be, transcendence. Therefore, is rooted in the essence of time. So that is the only answer which I can give you. Maybe if I put maybe in another way, I should say, eternal life is not a future life. Please. I mean, don't think about eternal life as a future life. I don't think that even Heidegger would say that. I mean, that is a purely religious day we're talking about. Eternal life does not mean that it's a future life. Eternal life is actually, it is a life which is in the present rather. That is what I call about the term eternity. Therefore, that's what I said that Heidegger also will be what to say appreciating this point of Panikkar. The eternal life is a life which is in the present, and therefore, God cannot be without man and the world. That's the main point. That's why we talk about the cosmotheandric. We cannot talk about a God without. I mean, if there are no human beings and there are no world, then there are no gods at all. Okay, na? Therefore, it is actually not conditioned, rather, but maybe I should the basis of a God is purely based on a world as well as the human subjects. That's it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other comments, questions? Amajit, Telugu?
No.
Okay. Shall we end with, sir?
Beg your pardon? To me?
Shall we complete the lecture then? I think like
Yeah.
maybe yeah. But that was really their presentation, and I mean it will take some time to me to mull over it and understand. It was really crisp and clear for that one. We have been so maybe one thing I would also, it's not a question or maybe a comment, for example. So earlier we had Dr. Manindra who was also talking about the idea of temporality. So with the idea of succession, which we experience, and then he says that we have to assume that due to this, like the relational viewpoint you talked about, we have to assume that there is some relation, and there will be a relator, which will be he did say temporality, but the idea of substantial time, the permanent existing time throughout existing time. So the in Vedanta, or what he was explaining through the Mimamsa or the Raghunath Shiromani's point of view, there comes a leap which he says that has to be there. We have to assume that, and that is happening through this idea of upadhi or adjunct, which is proposed to understand the universal idea of time. Although we experience only the succession.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, how it becomes really complex then to understand, because on the one hand we have to, we can't leave the idea of transcendence, and we can't leave the idea of universal idea of time. Just like, for example, Buddhists would say that it's already the santanantar, or the links which we experience. We can't reduce it because the experiential reality focuses on that part. Then, how do you think about this idea of assuming or taking a leap from the successive to the transcendence idea of time through the adjunct or upadhi, as they say?
Mm-hmm.
Like you also talked about Bhartrihari's idea of time. So Bhartrihari and later his other Abhinav Gupta takes from Bhartrihari and explains the Kala Shakti idea. So there also Kala and Kala Sankarshana are two concepts. Kala Sankarshana is basically that eats up time. That is proposed idea of universal
Mm-hmm.
idea
Mm-hmm.
of time. So uh, Panikar's idea of feeling that leap was going back to the present and experiencing present eternity in the present itself. But do you see any contrast, or how do you locate this idea of taking a leap from the Panikar's idea?
The leap is, I think, maybe I don't know how far I am correct anyway. I think as long as the human subject is a product of human history and time, we are subject to the paradox of time and eternity. This is what I was
Yeah,
my contention. I mean, we cannot somehow talk about, we cannot claim that we are not a product of history and time. We are a product of history and time. Therefore, as long as we are a product of history and time, I think, we are subject to the paradox of time and eternity. Number one. Number two, I would say, um, Panikar's this eternity. I mean, I don't know, maybe somehow I was a bit fascinated by that eternity, because you see, he says that because the non-dualistic intuition of non-dual character of reality, okay, now
yes,
non-dualistic intuition of the non-dual character of reality, because the reality according to him is non-dual, and if you are able to intuit it non-dualistically, okay, then that is, of course, what is known as the so-called, you know, uh, you know, eternity, we can say, or even
yeah,
Cosmotheandrism in fact. Okay. Therefore, we cannot somehow talk about the God somewhere up, okay, or the world somewhere here and man is somewhere here. No, not that way. I mean to say, see, maybe in the Indian philosophy there are three. What the ontology substitute? Okay, one is the Brahman, other one is the world, and third one is the Jiva. Okay, na.
Jiva,
And as far as Shankara is concerned, no Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva na Paraha. Okay, the one without a second. Whereas you see, for Visishta Dvaita or Visishta Dvaitam, okay, Ramana talks about what? This world and the Jiva, they are what to say, I mean, they are Visishta.
parts of, yeah,
Yeah, they are actually what to say, the qualifiers, no, they're qualifying Brahman. Whereas you
yeah,
see, for Advaita, for Shankara, we talk about a non-dual Brahman. Brahman is non-dual. I mean, in the sense that no,
yeah,
the whole reality is non-dual. Rather, therefore, once you are able to intuit that non-duality and experience in totality, okay, that's what I would say. It is the so-called, you know, you know, cosmotheandrism or eternal, something like that. This is what, of course, I believe. And for, and lastly, I would say, let me somehow thank Himanshu and my student Amarjit for having given a chance to be here. I mean, to talk to you all at least, and I'm really thankful to all of you and for your patient hearing. And if I were not able to make you convince something about something, if I'm able to confuse you, I think rather I'll be happy about that, because you see, confusion say hota hai conviction na. That is it. That's it.
yeah,
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
yes,
Thanks
sir.
a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank
Really,
you so
really, thank you, sir. And I should also thank Amarji for getting this link possible and the lecture possible, and
much.
filling this
Because of him
gap
only
again. Yeah,
because of him
filling
only
this
I
gap.
came.
Yes, sir, that's what I'm saying. And he always helps us. In He has been there throughout the series and guiding and helping me. And really, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Amarji, and thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Sebastian.